thank you, Prof. Ebrahim Moosa, for his enlightening speech. So, I would like to open to question for those who want to ask.
First of all, thank you. It is, for me, it's a very enlightening and refreshing discussion. Before I would like to follow up on the questions part, I will just give a few brief comments on your talk. First of all, as you mentioned about your own past education story as well, and you mentioned about Fazlur Rahman's work and his book Islam. It was just like 2 weeks back during the discussion with Nadir Hashimi on Fazlur Rahman. I was sitting there, and I also mentioned about the importance of the book by Fazlur Rahman Islam, which changed my overall outlook and understanding of Islam at that time. And that was just 2 weeks back, very recent. And Prof. Nadir was asking whether Fazlur Rahman is important. Definitely it is important here. That is one. But I'm also fascinated with the point that you gave just now. You gave a few very interesting, very fascinating quotes on how to understand tradition, which I think is very valuable. And one of them is you mentioned about the word, the phrase, now tradition is frozen, which the first thing which came to my mind at that time is from my courses in sociology about Max Weber's theory on the iron cage of rationality. So he was talking more on rational thinking and how the development in society is being turned into an iron cage, but how does it relate to the Islamic context fits very well on how do you explain about Islamic education and the tradition of Islamic education. In a way, it's turned frozen. It doesn't really turn like an iron cage, as Weber's phrase, but as something like frozen, you know. But more or less, it explains the same thing, that it explains the rigidity. It explains why is it that we are not growing, why we are just understanding things more or less in the old way. It might be right in the old way, but it's having a problem to mainly for Muslims at our current time to live in a more dynamic way and to address the challenges of our current time. And those are among the interesting points which I think is very interesting. And also the point that you gave on our current framework of education is still stuck with that Aristotelian and Neo-Platonic framework, which address a lot when it comes to matters relates to, of course, we know the logic of right or wrong, things like that, but it has very minimal value. I would say very minimal, that would be right. It has it doesn't cover a lot of things on how do we practically address the problems and challenges that the society is facing now. You mentioned about the current generation now, we need to have solutions in everything in our life now. So, and in fact, every time we will just refer to Google for what is the definition of a madrasa, we'll still go to Google instead of reading a book by Professor Ebrahim Moosa. So we want to have things fast and efficient. That is also part of the criteria of the people of our current time. Thus, there is a need for us to revise back the framework of our own learnings of a lot of matters, not just religion, that also relates to other matters. But one of those which we are stuck in is, of course, about religion and Islamic education. Okay, so the main question, which I think you give us a hint on, we need to have something like a revised version or a revived approach of education. So it relates to you mentioned about frameworks as an example of education, or if you want to touch on the okay, maybe you can just elaborate more on what is your suggestions, or what is the alternative or the options that we want to go further. I understand more or less you explained about the importance of the tradition, it must be appreciated. But we have a problem now that the tradition is frozen. The tradition is, as you said, very interesting quote, tradition is a living faith of the dead. So there is a baggage from the tradition itself. While understanding it is valuable, we cannot totally separate tradition, while at the same time we understand it is problematic. And to address our current modern challenges at the current time now. So what is it would you propose
Okay.
for our Islamic education first?
Sure.
Thank you for your comment. And let me just say something about the example of Google. Look, Google comes behind Google are millions and millions of hours of research and work to put together how to harness information, right? So the great thing about Google or any kind of this thing is about information harnessing. But Google cannot write your essay for you. Google cannot make policy for you. Google can only make information from a wide variety of sources available to you with the punch of a button. But if you're only going to take the two words that make sense to you in a book that Google showed to you, you're going to misunderstand the book. You're going to become more illiterate than literate. You will have to read the whole book or the chapter to understand what that author says, because Google can do a word search for you, but Google can't write you an essay. Google can't write you a book. Google can't write you. But even this attempt to harness information is a big task accomplished that Google does. So today, if I want to look for a word in Islamic texts and so on, I type it into a search engine, and all the ways in whatever books are available, all these material will become in front of me, but I still have to understand. So we need to be careful that that Googling Islam is not going to give you answer. It might give you a definition, but you might find that. So what most people do, they use the definition that pleases them most, that Google gives, that realigns, but doesn't necessarily mean is the right definition they found, because they have not done the research. Now this is what many people who are not in the knowledge tradition will find it and say, aren't you asking for, a certain elite to have knowledge? No. If it was so, why are you going to university and study with someone who's qualified to teach you political science or qualified to teach you biology? But when it comes to religion, any unqualified person can teach you. Why is that? I mean, this is the hypocrisy within Muslim communities. That we want for everything, we want qualified people to teach us. When it comes to religion, any unqualified person can go. And that means even a traditional person or a non-traditional person. So a lot of people say, well, I just follow the Quran. Okay. You think that's a big deal? You think you're a good Muslim? I mean, I just follow the Quran, or on some hadith I follow. What does that mean? So you're just making up your Islam the way you're going on. So, and a lot of people are on that page. And anybody can quote them a Quran and hadith, they become their big fans. And say, this is easy Islam, right? I'm with you. They give money to those people too. But it's not an Islam that is based on knowledge and information. So the Google example is a good example of information provision, but not analysis and critical dissemination of knowledge. Google can't do that for you. And even if we have the best robots in the world, right now, no matter how far you take artificial intelligence, AI will not be able to do the work that I think that in many ways these issues have got to do with question of values, it's got to do with human emotion, consciousness and so on and so forth. Now I know many people in favor of artificial intelligence and so on, I think are saying, machines also have consciousness. I understand that, but it depends on, machines do have a certain kind of consciousness and awareness because of the functions that they are being programmed to do. So they have a consciousness. There's artificial consciousness that machines have. We just don't understand it in that way. So coming back to this question of what is my proposal? Well, it will be very, overbearing of me to say what I think should be the proposal, because the last 200 years Muslims have been debating this issue and they can't come to a solution. Let's just stick to traditional Islamic educational places in the world. Manazir Hasan Gilani, the man I quoted, proposed in the 1930s and 40s for the subcontinent and said that what you need to do is to give Muslims who are going to college and so on a basic Islamic education of some important texts. And most of them, what is called the madrasas, he says, should be turned into schools. where you have regular school, where people learn languages, they learn basic skills, they have maths and science and so on, so on. And then you need a few institutions where the books that I studied should be taught. Now what I quickly realized is that the books that I studied between ages 17 and 23, in those books, I would have understood those books better if I had a proper undergraduate education. I already had Arabic, I had philosophy, I had those kind of stuff, and good understanding of sociology, and I would have understood those books differently. So seriously, madrasa curricula in South Asia, when they study classical texts, are actually a postgraduate program. Should actually. In many parts of the Arabic-speaking world, and increasingly in the pesantren of Indonesia, the pondoks here, some texts are still taught, but generally in the Arab world, generally at the Islamic universities, the professors give lectures and students take lecture notes. So they don't study a classical author. So in the same way that people would read Plato, the full book, the Islamic tradition have this, in the South Asia they have this classical tradition where you read books. Now, Gilani made that suggestion in the 1940s, okay, that you have to turn these madrasas into schools and then have a select few madrasas must become the postgraduate places where the real scholars of religion can go. People qualified at these schools can then go there and become scholars of religion. They'll be better prepared. Now his idea sounds perfectly logical and made sense if his proposal was applied in the 1930s. Okay? We now in the year 2017, the landscape has changed. Muslim orthodoxy and their various franchises have become extremely powerful. They have millions of dollars worth of real estate and projects and madrasas. They're not going to give up those things. So you need to be realistic. And Gilani was not an outsider, he was an insider, he was part of the tradition. His own Deoband school never followed any of those traditions. Okay? So, these Deoband schools are not going to change. So you have to be a realist how you're going to bring about change. The way me and a few colleagues from India and Pakistan and a few colleagues are thinking about is that we now have a program we call Madrasa Discourses, advancing scientific, theological and scientific literacy amongst recently graduated madrasa graduates. People who recently graduated, we put them through a 3-year online program. We teach them from Notre Dame. We meet in the summers for 2 weeks, for 1 week in the winter, where we take them through a curriculum of understanding history and tradition and the questions of science to supplement their knowledge and working from the stuff that they know themselves, and with the hope that they will find their feet in beginning to make sense of the stuff that they are learning, and that they could come to different kind of conclusions. And from, if they did not have this training that we are providing, they would have come at one conclusion A, but now they will come to a different kind of conclusion, will be B, X, Y, Z, much more complex one. So this is the none of the madrasas are going to give up their curricula. So they have an investment, they have power, and so on. So that suggestion of the 1930s might have sounded good. Still, if someone wants to do that, it could be, but you know, the madrasa institutions are very invested. So the proposal that I would have is that people who go through this traditional education, if they could have a good grounding in contemporary knowledge, right? If they had an undergraduate degree with humanities and social science, then go and study an advanced Islamic studies course at Al-Azhar and other places, they would make a different kind of sense of what they study to someone who goes there with a blank slate, who just got high school and goes straight there. Because now they will have complicated filters to make sense of what they are learning. They can take what is good and ignore what is not working, but they will have a filter. But part of the problem is that most people who want to go study Islam are people like me, who come to Islam and want to study Islam in a scholarly way because of a crisis of faith or a crisis of authenticity, a crisis of identity. Becoming a scholar of Islam is not a career path in our societies. It's for someone who he becomes deeply devout and wants to know, okay, how do I deal with my devotion, or how do I deal with this crisis? So oftentimes people are either put off by what they see as, and propaganda that they receive, that the West is all bad, Western knowledge, even in Malaysia or Indonesia or in any part of the world, Western knowledge is bad. And so they want to run away from that. They want to find true Islam, the way I did it. I want to find true Islam. And obviously over time I learned, but there was no other alternative. The universities who are teaching Islam don't do a great job in our societies. They don't do a great job in teaching Islamic studies. It's sometimes the most boring subject because you have to take it. We don't invest the best resources and the most smartest of people to teach those subjects, to make them come alive. And it must be also relevant to the society. And the scholarly study of Islam can't be pietism, but must be scholarly. So one of the big problems in the madrasas has been that historically the madrasas were what I call republics. The madrasas were part of what we call a republic of letters, and where people learned stuff, where they became scholars, and a tradition of learning was there. What has happened in South Asia is that madrasas have become what I call the republics of piety. The emphasis is only on piety. Now I'm not saying we don't need piety, but piety needs to be on firm grounds of knowledge. So basically you need both. And the madrasas have, unfortunately, normally the job of piety was done when you go after you graduated, then you find yourself a sheikh with whom you get a spiritual relationship, right? But in the years before that, you study seriously as a scholar. Now, unfortunately, the madrasas are no longer doing this robust intellectual. Some universities, of course, are doing good jobs in different parts of the world. But in Muslim majority societies, the universities, in terms of Islamic studies, Islamic philosophy, study of Islamic history, is doing a terrible job. Now, unfortunately, in the West, in North America and Europe, Islamic studies programs at secular universities are really interesting. Muslim heritage students get excited by studying that. Some of them go on to do PhDs and so on. Non-Muslims enjoy understanding the world of Islam and its history in all its diversity, and they become, informed and responsible global citizens and so on, and it makes a contribution. But in Muslim majority societies, these subjects are terribly neglected, and with the result, you either have either a highly politicized Islam or a highly romanticized Islam, but you don't have a Islam that has intellectual legs. So this is a long way to answer your question. The solution is that those who are going to study Islam must be equipped with both the knowledge of the world in which they are living and knowledge of tradition, and so that they can begin to create the big framework that is relevant today. All these conferences on Islamic education, the conference in Makkah, Islamization of knowledge, and all this kind of stuff really has not delivered, but rather delivered us into narrow cul-de-sacs from which many people don't even know how to back themselves out of anymore. So the way forward, I believe, is to take all knowledge seriously, and really put a lot of emphasis on getting high quality, high standard of Islamic knowledge and the variety of Islamic disciplines, historically and contemporary. You have to take contemporary Muslim anthropology and sociology seriously. You need to read Ibn Khaldun very carefully. You need to study the Muslim philosophers. You need to study people who studied tafsir. What are their methodologies? People who study hadith. All those knowledge traditions that Muslims have, ilmul kalam, theology, Islamic mysticism, adab, literature, and so on. Both adab in terms of morality, but also Arabic and Persian, Urdu and Malay and other languages, Muslim languages of literature also must come into that, but also moral literatures must come into it. All those things make a contribution. Today, when you talk about saying to a Muslim religious scholar that you need to read the classical Malay literature, they said, what does that got to do with Islam? It's got everything to do with Islam, because these authors who wrote that came from a Muslim experience. Okay? So unfortunately, we need to be careful, you know, who are the people that are providing the remedies. Because sometimes those who we think are the physicians might be doing more damage than doing good to the body politic of Islam.
You mentioned that you were trained in the classical, traditional, so what we call Sekolah Pondok here, okay, the Indian Pakistani style of Islamic schools. And then, but at the end, you were interested in political Islam. I would be interested to know, you see, in Islam, so-called Islamic countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan,
Muslim majority
where,
societies.
yeah, Muslim majority, and we claim that Islam is really, you know, what we stand by. These schools are the worst off. They are kept to be the worst off. It's not that we cannot afford, because Muslim majority Pakistanis, Indonesians, Indian Muslims, Malaysians, we claim to be pious people, so we teach our kids from 3 years old, pray and read the Quran. We do all we can to make sure that they perform the ibadahs and everything. But at the end of the day, do you feel that these pesantrens, these Islamic schools, these madrasas, Sekolah Pondok, in Malaysia itself, as you can see in Kelantan, Terengganu, where the concentration of these schools are, they are politicized to, what you call, to appease these politicians and to be used by these politicians, to play to the people that, look, we are helping these people and they're pious and they're praying for us, but at the same time, we do not invest in this kind of schools. I'm sure you have visited some of the Sekolah Pondoks here, I don't know, but they are the worst off. You know, they're the dirtiest, they're unkept. Students
Non-hygienic,
yeah, non-hygienic, and not only that, the
Poverty.
students are kept in sort of cages,
Yes.
in non-physical cages, where you actually, they're cut off from the world. Just living for the
Isolation.
hereafter. Yeah.
Isolation.
So are these politicized to an extent? I mean, do you address this in your book, where
No,
these madrasas are political to a certain extent?
No, I don't address this question in the book, but I can answer it. There's two things. You know, I was around in the subcontinent between 75 and 81, right? So the Iranian earth-shaking events happened and so on. The question is, you know, why did I gravitate to that? Because the people who were supposed to teach me authentic Islam were failing at their job. They were failing at the people, the traditionalists. So I became, you know, disenchanted, right? And so I gravitate to another bad thing, which is, you know, a highly politicized thing and so on. And the thing is that I didn't have good role models. There's an absence of good Muslim role models on a global scale. Now, obviously, in my time, there was no internet and so on and so forth, and there was no way of communicating. Maybe I could have found something. But thank God there was someone like Fatih Uthman, the late Fatih Uthman, who I write about, who gave me my first job, who I heard speak. He helps me navigate, you know, how to think about these issues, because he also made a long journey. So therefore, the first thing I will say to people who have made their journeys in Islam, they have to write books about their journeys in Islam. Because when we move from one place to another, because the younger people, they can begin to read that and say, yes, we also see ourselves in that journey. The absence of role models, books are the multiplier. The thing about, you know, the conditions of those schools, they vary in the subcontinent. They are reasonable standard ones and substandard ones. And some of these things are by design, because they want to keep these people under control, the kids under control. And the ones in which the Taliban kids are kept and when they are trained to turn into fighters and so on, those kind of stuff, even that's a totally different kettle of fish. Now, I have not been to the ones in Terengganu and other places and so on, so I don't know, but I take the word, and I know of other places elsewhere where I've seen similar things. The thing about politicians and the people who manage those pawn dogs, it's the politicians and those people who manage those pawn dogs, not the kids. The kids just become the exhibits. It's the managers and the politicians. The politicians need the support of these managers of the schools because they carry weight. They talk to all the parents of those kids. And they also preach at the mosques. So they have a big network. So the politicians need their support. But the politicians are not going to put money in there because one is that those managers don't want them to change their world for them. They don't want those things to be changed, because if the government is going to give money, or if the government sector is going to give money, then the government is going to ask for certain standards, then the people who manage those schools, they lose control. I don't know what it is here, but the madrasas in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, majority of them are controlled by communities. They do their own fundraising. The government cannot interfere in any one of those. Do the government interfere in, does the government support the pawn dogs? Do the government give them stipends? So it's also community money. And the managers of the pawn dogs, they don't want the government to give money because then the government takes over. So, but the government, the politicians need their support for elections, and they come and visit there, they take pictures, and everything is happy, and say, yo, these are the real true people, right? But unfortunately, not real good education takes place there. And oftentimes the education is narrow and closing of the Muslim mind rather than opening the Muslim mind. So I think I more or less understand what is going on there, and it's because politicians and the managers of these pawn dogs are both using Islam for their own goals. They've instrumentalized Islam. And instrumentalization of Islam is really high. We are no longer interested in creating a culture of civility, of a culture of progress, what you used to call here Islam Hadari, right? A civilized conversation about Islam. Islam that brings about civility. The civility that you can have a Mahmud Hassan and you can have a Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi that can show civility. When the worst in humanity should be showing, civility shows up. That is a religious tradition that has built human beings that are not robots and don't react on because you press their buttons, they explode. So what Islam really is about the creation of civility and adab and akhlaq and beauty. And beauty begins with hygiene. Unhygienic conditions are antithetical to Islam. Yet some of the most quote-unquote places that are supposed to be Islamic are most unhygienic, right, in different parts of the world. So these are real internal challenges, and what progressives need to do is that they need to learn this tradition and take it much more seriously. They need to be better than the traditionalists at their own game. They need to know that knowledge, plus they need to bring these knowledge systems together. And you must have research. You can't talk and on slogans either. So progressives can't have slogans. You must have reasoned arguments and informed arguments by multiple sources of knowledge, so that you can then make a convincing case to people. Now, I know it's an uphill battle because people are so used to the supermarket sloganized, commercialized version of Islam that they want to hear certain things and they think it's authentic. So the first job is to re-educate the Muslim sensibility of literacy. To re-educate that slogan-based Islam is not literacy. And the alternative must be ready at hand. That means much more resources need to go into that. These various institutes for the study of Islam, departments must be upgraded, and they must have better scholars and people who are really going to deliver to the communities. And 1 and 2 and 3 mosques need to have better imams that can do that might have better literacy than the imam before that. So what is a tradition? A tradition, intellectual tradition is when this tradition when this generation hands over a better framework to the next generation. And each generation hands over an updated, upgraded tradition to the next generation. By us, the idea of tradition has already disappeared. It's turned into slogans. Because for 300-400 years, we have not worked on the tradition. We had the colonialism that disrupted the Muslim world, but before that, under the major empires, the Ottomans and so on and so forth, they were going in a direction that was not really helpful. They were resistant. They were not entirely sure what they were doing in a changing world, and so on. In this part of the world, there were Muslim, princely estates and so on that ran the show, and they might have had a lot of creative people out there, but their histories are still not studied. They might not have written this stuff. It was an oral tradition, so we don't exactly fully know what was going on here 300-400 years ago, if there are any gems that we could pull from there. We hear about Raneri, we hear about a few other people and so on who did some work, but to my knowledge, I'm not an expert on this region. So what the historical tradition is should be studied, made available, because that was one that fully connected with the life of the people, with the experience of the people, with the different religions here, and how they related to each other, right? And there's Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam and native and indigenous religions that work beautifully together, and there was harmony and there was coexistence. So those examples need to be studied. So what I'm trying to say is that a tradition is, there are reasons why Muslim tradition fell into disuse or became narrower. Because once you were challenged politically, in other words, the tradition became narrower. We don't want the knowledge of the foreigners. We don't want the knowledge of other people. We don't. So Muslims also didn't want to know about philosophy anymore, even Muslim philosophy. They don't want to know about Muslim theology anymore. That theology is all wrong. So someone had to be made a scapegoat. They didn't want to hear about Sufis anymore. Sufism is bad news. So slowly, Muslims cut themselves off from vital, resources from the past because of their own political conditions. And what we really need to encourage is the best and the brightest in our communities must see that becoming a professor of the study of Islam and religion and so on is a respectable career, is a respectable profession, it's a respectable life path in which you can make a difference to the lives of humanity. You make a difference, and not let those who might have had other reasons to go and study Islam. Often people go and study Islam just to combat, to be combative also. And the identity question is a big problem because people are confused in the modern period. Who are they? What are they? So they want to have Islam with a lot more kind of bells and whistles, but not really content. So a lot of bells and whistles Islam going around.
First of all, our sister mentioned about madrasa, pondok, and the situation of madrasa, pondok, and I think just first thing to point out is there are differences, or at least there are differences in the types of madrasa and pondok, as mentioned by Prof. just now, that even the madrasa itself has quite a variety.
Variety inside.
Yeah, because at least I've come up with I've prepared one paper on Islamic education in Malaysia, and mainly the impact of modernization on Islamic education in Malaysia. If we go back through the history of Islamic education itself, based on the findings which I got. First of all, the pondok is the first. We started with the pondok, which the madrasa system came out later. It's something like it turned into a school. So pondok is a lot more traditional, it's more community education, and then it later turned to be then later the madrasa system came in, mainly from the Egyptian system. And then what happened is independence. When Malaysia had independence, Malaysia had a very very clear policy on education, and part of it is Islamic education. Part of it is to include Islam in the syllabus for all schools with a minimum of 15 students. In any classes with 15 students, you need to teach Islam. So it becomes compulsory, but it becomes a lot more simple. Before this, education is a lot more comprehensive. So when it turns into a policy and a law, all schools are forced, either how to put it, to implement the Islamic education in all schools. And part of that process also, the popularity of national funded government school became higher compared to the community type of school. And later it turns out to be, just to cut the discussion short, I would put it as, it turns naturally that the public or government schools became more popular, and the traditional pondok and the madrasa school become less popular, and most of them started to got closed down, and a lot of them is being taken over by the government. In the first few years, they were there is something like a hybrid model, but after 5 to 10 years, the government took over totally. So
Most of the pondoks.
yeah, most of the pondoks,
Yeah.
it totally became national.
But whatever pondoks might exist now are possibly highly politicized by different political parties and Islamic parties.
The problem in Malaysia, we have a very different setup of madrasas, unlike the ones probably that you studied, or in Egypt. Because in Egypt, it came from the very learned sitting down and teaching a circle of people, then they came to them. Here it started off with what you call people trying to be pious, trying to learn the ibadah. So they go to these places and literally go into isolation. If, for example, I taught in a place next to Mamali for a year, international schools, and you can't teach English Jack and Jill. You get someone coming with a knife and saying, why are you teaching my kids Christian names? And that is the kind of closeness that we have. And then again, we have, like he said, we have this very basic pondoks, and then we have the madrasa, which is a structural setup where they actually teach Tawheed, faith, and everything else that is in Kelantan. They are under the state government. That's called Yayasan Islam Kelantan, which is what he says the governments have taken over. The problem in Malaysia is religion is under the state. So the government, federal government, actually did not take over the madrasas or the pondoks.
State governments took
Yeah,
over.
so the Sultan is the head of the religion, so it comes under their purview. Then now, coming back to what he said, there was this sort of sidelining the pondoks as the national schools came into being, and the Malays became more progressive, and then we have a subject, religious knowledge, Islamic religious knowledge in the school, where every school has to have classes, which is 2-3 times a week, from age 7 up to pre-university. But now we have a revival of very educated, very westernized people who are sending to these schools, tahfiz, we call them tahfiz now. They're very modern, very expensive. I myself experimented with one with my son. It didn't work out. 1,000 ringgit a month.
Wow.
With amazing facilities, swimming pools, archery. You know, you would think this is my kid is going to heaven and he's going to bring me to heaven. You know, this is the understanding of the modern rich Malays who are coming back to Islam. They have done everything. They have slept around, they have drunk and everything, and now it's time to educate my children. And this is the best way. So this is the tahfiz revival that we are having in Malaysia. And this is the madrasas which we understand now for the modern people, like my age, who have children. We want our children to have a an Islamic education, but at the same time, we are not willing to send them to these pondoks and madrasas under these mullahs and all that. So we send them to this. But at the end of the day, then again, my question is this. At the end of the day, we spend so much, we still get the same standard of so-called highest, what you call education, without concentration on knowledge, without concentration on literacy. They might have books and everything, but you are taught the basic Arabic. Even and these schools, their graduates go on to Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar accepts from our pondoks, from our madrasas, from our tahfiz, without even proper academic qualifications. And they go there, and these are the very people who go there. If you go to Cairo, you will see them walking in herds. They stay in one apartment. They memorize the whole Quran. They know the tafsir that they learned, but there's no thinking of the tafsir, and they tarjama the Quran, but they can speak a smattering of Arabic. They come back, and this becomes a cycle. And this is Malaysia that we have. This is the Muslim Malaysia that we have today. So we cannot discuss anything like this. This is considered a very rare occasion when Muslims can discuss. This is too much.
Okay. I think I got an idea of what's going on. So I understand the difference between the pondok and the tahfiz schools. Now, in different parts of the world, first of all, I think there should be more study about the psyche of the accomplished, formerly very westernized Muslim who then goes into redemption mode and want to then kind of quickly they want to wear jalabiya 24 hours, they want to do long beards, they want to do that. The wife goes into niqab or hijab, niqab, or completely, into kind of chic, Islamic dress and so on, which is very fancy. 2 umrahs a year, Hajj every 2 years, very, the kind of, deluxe Islam. And with that, these tahfiz schools with 1,000 ringgit a month payment for every child, who's going to argue with the child who wants to become Hafiz al-Quran? Hafiz al-Quran is a great tradition. And so that child, if the child doesn't go to Al-Azhar, at least will memorize the Quran, make the parent proud, and they think that the child now who has memorized the Quran becomes a religious symbol for the family. So it becomes my son or my daughter has become Hafiz al-Quran, right? And so that is a status symbol for the parents. Now, oftentimes those young people, if they go to college or university, they can't always carry that responsibility out. So they no longer are proficient in the Quran, or some of them are proficient and they are also proficient at college, so they can keep up both career and they can keep their Quran fresh. What happens at a place like Al-Azhar, a precondition to getting into any program in Al-Azhar is that you have to be a Hafiz. So these kids who go to Al-Azhar, being your tahfiz schools, they've already got that down. So check that box. Otherwise, if you go in, that you have to at least memorize some chapters of the Quran, not everything. So the literacy in tahfiz schools is not great. There might be some very basic literacy, but I has already commented that the literacy in the madrasas and so on are also not in the most, what I call the postgraduate madrasas. Let's call about these madrasas in India and Pakistan, where they study a very serious curriculum. Even there, they are not succeeding in delivering their own goods. They can't deliver their own goods, even the way it is, because of various deficits. So therefore, the services that those institutions provide, many Malay students used to study in India and Pakistan before. I don't know if they still study there anymore. A lot of them from Selangor and from Terengganu and other places, and they come back and so on. They don't have the full tradition under their command, because to access that tradition you need other skills, as I've realized. So, the challenge here would be, look, the thing is these tahfiz schools are going to grow tenfold. If I come back here in 5 years' time, it's going to be double the amount, because there's a market. The question is, how do you take those people and give them something more. So can you create a tahfiz school that does the tahfiz also, but also offers a good, sound, open-minded Islamic education that will be along the lines that I'm talking about, not the one that shuts them down, that makes them grow beards or certain kinds of forms of dress and emphasize that, and nothing in terms of the soul and the mind. So that is the issue, and parents put on young children a big burden that those young children might not necessarily be able to carry by making them become Hafiz al-Quran at a very early age. I know there are 2 Hafizes in this place, right? You memorize the Quran, and several of them. So you know what the burden is, that you have to keep it fresh, and it means that you have to have a certain kind of practice and so on. But oftentimes what is needed now is good literacy on Islam. So there should be an alternative place which is called Islamic literacy classes of a high quality, and that are cheaper than that. But also people must feel they're getting something out of it, that they're feeling a part of their soul and their question is met there. And that's what progressives need to put more effort into.
The bad situation of the general school and the general madrasa, because I don't see it as just something standard. I mean, if you compare to the situation as in Indonesia as an example, the pesantren, from what I understand, is continuously developing. In fact, there are also some kind of problem from my last conference which I attended. They say that now the pesantrens are keep on growing. In fact, there are also so-called this Wahhabi Salafis pesantren is also being developed. Now there's already like 200 Salafi Wahhabi pesantrens in Indonesia, which previously the content of education is highly Islamic traditional, which suits the Indonesian context. It is a worry there. But from our side, we have this problem of the developing of new progress on traditional Islamic institutions. For me, I think the main reason is because the government has played a very dominant role in developing and promoting Islamic education in Malaysia, making the community less responsible and playing less role.
Less ownership.
Less ownership. While instead of Indonesia, the community since their early traditional time, there's continuously to be highly involved in developing and driving their own Islamic education, either through their organizations like Nahdlatul Ulama, Muhammadiyah, and the other organizations. So the situation is mainly, it is poor here because of not so much because of the school itself, but the whole setting of
the ownership. The communities don't have ownership.
But however, now, as you mentioned, we also notice of fresh trends of new, as you use the tahfiz schools, I would call it new Islamic schools, so-called Islamic schools, which is highly modern and highly expensive to attend, because the model of education is no longer community-based, but it's very capitalistic.
Private educated.
You need to attend. If you want to get enrolled, you need to take a test, and if you pass the test, then you can continue. So it's totally different with the previous more community traditional schools.
Yeah, these private schools are a rising phenomenon all over North America, Europe, in parts of Sub-Saharan Africa, because it's seen as safe schools, identity protecting schools. You don't have to mix with people of other religious traditions, other moral currents that might be there. And so these are kind of protective zones, especially for female students also, because there will be no dating, no those kind of stuff and so on. And some of these places do a good job in making the kids college ready. Some of those schools are really good and producing good results in the standardized exams. But the challenge is when those kids come to college and universities.
Setting is different.
The setting is different and they feel very challenged. Then all kinds of other things develop. So oftentimes many of them find a pathway to Islamic university, right? But not everybody can fit in there. So the question generally the educational authorities in governments and others don't want to look at don't want to understand that the study of Islam and the teaching of Islam requires a whole new framework. Government, ministers and educational administrators say, oh, we have to teach the students Quran and the Sunnah. That is better. Don't teach him about Imam Shafi. Don't teach him about this. No, don't teach him this stuff. Because they think that is true Islam. Now, no one is going to deny the authority of the Quran and the Sunnah. The question is, you need to have knowledge to teach the Quran and the Sunnah. So this is this knowledgeless Islam. It's a contradiction in terms, because Islam is knowledge. But this is this knowledge-free Islam. You know, Islam free of any knowledge. You just have to make people memorize certain things and they get it and they have it in a textbook, you check the box. But how the student understands it, how it receives it, how it creates a mindset. So students come at university, they have weird understanding of what Islam is. So you have to undo a lot of damage that they've suffered and so on. And this damage also manifests itself at the community level.
Just to add on the other point, I see actually there's two reasons. It's not just one. Why is it there are new expanding new market, as Prof mentioned about new Islamic school? One is because of the interest on Islam has grown. But for the other reason is the critic towards national schools is getting worse and worse over the years. The way I see it now is that, as Prof said, new Islamic schools will keep on growing. But I think what is important for us, organizations like IRF and important scholars, is how we can put in some kind of ideas and influences in shaping the framework, as Prof said, of these new schools. That would be, I think, very critical over the next decade or two.
That is a big challenge. Yeah.
Would you say? I mean, I haven't read your book yet, but in that book, did you study at any point of time? For example, if you see the older ustaz, the older sheikhs in Azhar, the much retired ones, they seem to be more knowledgeable. They seem to have more literacy, what do you call, knowledge based on facts and figures and based on the existing manuscripts. But today we have young, I didn't want to say half-baked, that would be wrong, but you know, just graduates of Islam, Islamic knowledge. What we have like in UIA, they come out from the Islamic University, and then these are the teachers who are teaching us Islam. You know, so do you see the quality come down?
You know. I mean, Muslim education has. I mean, the situation we are in here is not a situation that happened overnight. It's been going on for the last 200 years. So we are harvesting a very serious crisis in ourselves. So even if you look at the early 20th century, where there's some big names who did some very interesting things, like Muhammad Abdu and Afghani and so on and so forth, Muhammad Abdu had a hard time telling people at the Azhar to study, to study Ibn Khaldun. They said, we're not going to study Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun is not our tradition. That's what the Sheikh said. And there's a very big name Sheikh who told him that. He told Muhammad Abdu that. So there were some folks who were enlightened, but also lots of other people who were knuckleheads. So we have something called aql and naql. So aql, which is reason, and naql, which is tradition-based, people who only follow the reported tradition. So I believe that Sheikh Hamza Yusuf coined this phrase, and I'm using it because he used it, and it makes sense. So a lot of people are knuckleheads. They just follow the knuckle. They don't follow the aql. They call knuckle, and it plays well, the knuckleheads. So there's always been a lot of knuckleheads around throughout our intellectual tradition too, and so there was always that, and therefore the balance was always skewed in favor of the knuckleheads for the last 200-300 years. So it was a very much in the Islamic tradition always followed both aql and naql as co-equal authority, not letting the one dominate the other. And that's where it operates with. So I can't say with honesty that it was better 100 years ago. The problem today is that Islam or religion has to do so much work. The politics doesn't work, the economics doesn't work, the social family doesn't work, and so on. So all the weight is put on the poor sheikh to give all the answers. And the scholar must get on. And globally, to be a Muslim and the psychological trauma that Muslims carry turns most religious actors into kind of, political disseminators. They're fighting America, they're fighting Russia, they're fighting Assad, they're fighting the government locally, So they're fighting wars that is not, they're not qualified to fight those wars. They're supposed to be teaching people, about ibadat and about good understanding of, an enlightened understanding of what is fiqh and what is knowledge and those kind of stuff. They can't do that. Now, and it's easy to become a demagogue. All you need to read is the morning newspaper. Well, you don't even have to read. You just have to listen to the television news of your favorite channel, right? That delivers the news for you in an emotional way. So then you can make a Friday khutbah on that. Okay? And then you feel good, and you pump up the audiences. And your audience is on the same page like you as the imam, because they also listen to the same television and the radio channels. So everybody's in the same bubble. So everybody gets angry about the world, and they're going to destroy the world, and they're going to kill those people, and they're going to do all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, the literacy is going down, they're losing out economic stakes, they don't have global power, they don't have power in the world, and all this kind of stuff. And then they want to know why they don't have power. Because they're not working hard. You can't become a nation of success if you don't have education at a high level in your nation. Your people, I came now from Indonesia, met a whole bunch of expats. The expats say we get paid double the amount of the local people because we have to do all the work. He or she comes in at the level of becoming for instance, a design person. They got no one who can implement it. There's no skill base. There's either a laid-back attitude, there's no work ethic. But I told that person, but you should train. She said, it's hard to train these people. They got no motivation to be trained. That's not this expat who came and gets paid a lot of money, not his or her problem. Is the national system has not educated people high enough that they can do the difficult tasks. You don't need expats in today's world where you have so much talent, but you haven't educated your talent. Your education system is not good, so you need to get people from India, you need people from Europe who've got a higher level of education, higher level of skill, so they're going to come and do the jobs in Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore and other places where the locals can't do the work. Because the locals are all interested in getting hot under the collar over identity issues. Whose beard is longer? Do you hate the Sunni or do you hate the Shia? They're getting hot over that. Meanwhile, the world is marching forward, and you can't even make your own. You can't make your own car. Well, you make your own car, but they can't make their own tanks. They can't make their own warplanes. They can't make their own medical equipment. No research, but they can get really good hot over blasphemy laws and all kind of stuff. Really get hot about global issues. That basically distracts them from the real issues. To be a Muslim means that you need today advance human development. You must become a resource to develop yourself and other people, human development. And you need to have dignity. You can't get dignity without knowledge and without success. You'll always be a failure. The popular word is you're a loser. So losers become spoilers. If you're a loser, then you can spoil other people's things. And people who's doing something better than you, you're going to put out your dagger at them, you're going to try and do that. So it's a terrible psychology, but it requires a few people to say enough is enough. You must have zero tolerance for these things. And you need to build the alternative structures right there and say, we're not going to entertain this. Don't spend a minute more on Sunni Shia nonsense. You can't spend a second on that. Because that takes you away from building a great society. And look, Malaysia, Indonesia, and this part, you are better off than many other parts of the Muslim world. Better off by 1,000,000 times. 1,000,000 times you are better off. Sub-Saharan Africa, other parts of Asia. You have standard. You can take this to great lengths, great possibilities. But it requires work, requires vision. And you must get rid of the distractions and get to the real work.
Okay, thank you very much for for Prof. Ebrahim Moosa, and thank you for everyone. And don't forget that we have many more sessions with Prof. Ebrahim, and I hope all of us can come tomorrow at Concord Hotel for a book launch translation of Prof. Tariq Ramadan's book, Radical Reform, by our brother Muziru Idham. So that's all for today. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Masalam.